Hey, are you Dr. Shandin Pete?
Yeah.
I'm Eva with SUSCDI, and I'm here to ask you 24 questions. Are you willing to film with us today?
Let's do it.
All right. What are you working on today?
Right now I'm looking at some hydrographs of a river near my home that I grew up.
That is awesome. Do you want to go on a walk with us and I'll keep asking you questions?
Okay, let's do it, yeah. Okay, what you got?
Can you share a bit about your heritage?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in western Montana on a small town called Arlee, and in that particular location is the sort of the existing homelands of the Bitterroot Salish people, which are part of a larger group of Salish-speaking folks that occupy largely most of the northwest of this continent.
I see, that's wonderful. What research fields do you specialize in?
I call myself a ethnographic geoscientist. I work mainly in archival ethnography along with hydrogeology, geomorphology, and hydrology.
Could you explain maybe what hydrogeology is for people who are not familiar?
Sure, yeah. So it's the study of the flow of water underground. Generally speaking, groundwater flow, those kind of things, and how they interact with the subsurface.
How long have you been involved in your research?
Oh boy, maybe I don't know, since 2004, maybe, I suppose. I don't know. What is that? What's the year now? 2025?
Yes.
I don't know, do the math. I don't know, what is it? 20 something years. I don't know.
How did this bring you to UBC?
I was working at a tribal college where I grew up in the States. That particular job was not fulfilling enough, I suppose. I mean, it was in a certain way, but I wanted to sort of branch out and see what else was going on in the world. And happened to be an opening here at the University of British Columbia. So I applied and interviewed and ended up here.
How long have you been here at UBC, and what's kind of your education background?
I've been here about 4.5 years. I have a master's in geology and a doctorate in curriculum and instruction with a focus on science education.
I see. What courses do you teach, and what are your favorites?
So since I've been here, I've taught the Solid Earth course, which is EOSC 110. I've taught principles of geomorphology, the science communication or the science seminar course, SCL 113. I've also taught a course out of my faculty called Ways of Knowing. My favorite, I don't know, I mean, they all bring a certain flavor of favorability, I suppose. But I guess the challenge of the newness of particular courses is always interesting and fun. Seeing a variety of different students and how they respond to the different challenges and new content, I think is always an interesting endeavor. So I don't know if I could say that I have a favorite. I enjoy interacting with students. I enjoy the new challenge of introducing new concepts to a wide variety of audiences.
If you could choose a course to shout out, which one would it be?
I don't know. I'm a classic middle child, so I'm really indecisive and very diplomatic. So I feel like I'd be weighing favor to one subject or another. So I don't know. I mean, the 110 course is I mean, it's enjoyable because I get to cover a lot of topics. They're larger classes, so there's upwards of 100 plus students in there. So that brings a wide variety of opinions and familiarity with course topics. So that's really enjoyable. I get to really try to be a storyteller of the discipline of geology in that particular course.
What's like a moment from one of these classes or lectures or field work that reminded you why you teach?
I think seeing students leave a classroom with the smiling face, I think is always like something that sticks with me when they leave a class and they have a particular reflection about something I showed them or some method in which I employed to excite them about the topic. think is something that I always remember. I try to use a lot of multimedia, relevant topics to deliver content in the geosciences. Probably further back in time, with a cohort of students I taught earlier on in my career, seeing those students go on to become professors themselves, lawyers or hydrologists, I think is always a highlight for those particular courses.
What sort of inspired you to go into science?
Probably just the idea of uncertainty, I think, is what sort of drove me into this particular field. I grew up along a river that I had the privilege of using as a study for my master's degree, and there was a lot of unknowns that I had about how that river operated, and I guess revealing how certain phenomenon work as far as hydrological systems, I think sort of catapulted me into the field. But I think in addition to trying to understand how my own people and my own cultural upbringing informed the sciences, I think it was I don't know, an obvious motivator to try to locate the intersection between those two things.
As an Indigenous student or professor in science, have you sort of faced any challenges in your field?
Yeah, I think like any other student who's endeavoring to get educated in these academic institutions, there's many social and economic barriers that I think we all face that are fairly common. I think one particular sort of social norm or I guess social phenomenon that some Indigenous students encounter is sort of this idea that we weren't meant to succeed in a particular way. So sort of this overt racism or bias that we often encounter, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's common among most educators in the university system, but it certainly exists. And for me, I took it as a motivator to show folks that we're all human in a particular way. We all have a similar biology and a way to think of the world, and I think we all have a skill to learn in the way that these university systems teach. So, yeah, I mean, I hate to focus on those kind of things, but they exist, and I know they exist for other Indigenous students and Indigenous folks trying to get into academia at this particular level.
Do you have any preference for teaching or research?
I don't know. That's a tough one. I think I enjoy a certain aspect of teaching, which is making things make sense, not just to me but to many different people and many different perspectives. It's like a worthy challenge to try to disseminate some odd, obscure understanding to a generation that's not of my own, or to a cultural group that's not of my own. So that's teaching is one of those sort of endeavors that allows me to do that. In addition, I mean, research is a big part of gaining a particular set of skills, but also content that allows me, I guess, a wider variety of things to bring into the classroom that might help make things make sense. So I think they work hand in hand. I couldn't say I prefer one over the other. I think there's many different ways to research something, and there are certain ways of researching things that I don't prefer. But like I said, there's a variety of other ways to research things that I do prefer, and that goes with teaching too, I guess. There's a variety of ways to teach. Some I don't prefer, some I prefer.
I see. What are some ways hydrogeology research practices and Indigenous research practices intersect well together?
I hold the belief that science is science, no matter who's employing it. I think we employ a particular skill of the mind and of the brain that is fairly common across humanity. Technologies and the origin of technologies sort of comes into play in how we perform science. but also I think the structure of how science is allowed to operate, I think makes some differences. Among my communities, we don't necessarily have large institutions like the University of British Columbia. We do have smaller institutions, but largely they mimic the larger Western academic structure. But the indigenous science that occurs in my communities, it requires very similar thinking patterns. However, their intent and purposes are far different. So it doesn't require the same sort of things that university science would require. So I think the core of them are very similar. The context in which they're employed and utilized, I think, are very different, and the things that they answer to are different.
Does your cultural background bring any sort of skills that are beneficial towards your research?
I think so, but I don't think no more than any other person's. Coming with a strong ethic, I think, of honesty about what you're doing is ultimately important for the validity of what you do, and for I guess the integrity of the things that you do as viewed from someone else's perspective. I think ultimately those two skills are highly valuable, but I think all communities, all cultures have those things. I don't see a huge difference. Of course, there's many contextual differences that would have me employ a certain set of skills within a context that might be somewhat foreign to another scientist coming from a far different context, if you know what I mean.
Are there any sort of misconceptions that students may have about indigenous sciences?
I think so, yeah. I think there's sort of a romantic view when you say the word indigenous. People conjure up ideas of how people used to be in the past, a manner of living or a manner of doing things in the world. But, indigenous people, just like anyone else, we live in the modern world, but as I mentioned previously, there's particular contexts that certain types of science work and don't work. Placing indigenous anything in the past, I think, is something a lot of people who don't know a lot about indigenous matters, I think, is a tendency for folks to do. I think there's a lot of growth that needs to happen in indigenous science right now as it is being performed in academics. It works in a community of indigenous scholars doing things in our communities, but it works different when you're looking at a group of indigenous scholars in an academic institution such as this. And I don't think we've quite figured out how to make that work authentically yet. It's sort of, it leans on very romantic ideas so far, and I think it's at its infancy of understanding.
Are there any moments where your indigenous knowledge maybe, or anything from like your childhood, have changed your research question or methodology, or anything you've learned?
Yeah, I think most of the things that I do are sort of rooted in the things I want to know that work and benefit my community in a certain way, or even just benefit me in my own understanding. I certainly, what I do as a disciplinarian of geology, hydrogeology, or geoscience as a whole, certainly those things that I do benefit geoscience, but the very specific research questions and the strategies that I employ are pointed directly at a phenomenon within my community or within sort of the larger indigenous community.
If you could redesign a science curriculum from scratch, what would be the first change you'd make?
Oh man, I'd make it super hands-on. I would demand that professors only use a maximum of 10 slides, PowerPoint slides, and employ sort of this grade school strategy where you talk for 15 minutes and then you do something. Talk for 15 minutes and do something. That's a hard thing to do, honestly, and that's sort of what I do when I'm trying to teach, but it's not always achievable. But I think that's to make it exciting, you know, you have to engage students in something beyond just talking at them about interesting things. Unless it's make it a very interesting story. Otherwise, you're gonna lose people, and you lose that opportunity to excite them about whatever the topic is that you're talking about.
I agree with those points.
Yeah.
Yes. In the Indigenous Science Seminar you're developing, what skills and not just content do you want students to leave with?
I think in that particular course, I would want students to leave with a really good understanding of what it means when we say indigenous, and how that translates to what they know. And I think probably the larger goal would be to for students to understand the sameness of what they know against the sameness of what indigenous folks know. And hopefully providing the students with an understanding of how different contexts can produce different results or different aspirations of knowledge.
I see. From your work with Salish astronomy, what is something scientists can learn from today?
I think probably one of the contributions of the work I do in astronomy is really more about looking into the past to see how people before now's time understood the world and how they viewed the structures of the stars, and really what was the philosophy behind the thoughts that drove them to really observe certain stars versus others. I think that's probably a very interesting one. There's some particular constellations that were used for markers of time and seasonality, and there's other ones that are very mysterious that I still don't understand why my ancestors observed them or noted them where they were rising or where they were setting. And I think some of those understandings might help to inform or even to teach about astronomy in a more interesting way.
That's awesome. Do you have any sort of piece of advice that maybe an elder or a community member gave you? The advice that I sort of remember or recall about life has come from many different ages of people, not just older folks. But I learned a lot from the aspirations of younger folks, and generally, it's a fairly common thing, and that's just being open-minded and not being so rigid that only what you think is important. It's probably the message I get quite a bit from older and younger folks is, an openness to a new understanding, or an openness to understand the thoughts of the past generations and what's our responsibility to make their lives comfortable in the things that we do, because they come from a far different generation, still have particular needs and understandings that we have to still try to uphold. Do you have any sort of advice for Indigenous students pursuing science?
Staying curious and having that curiosity work for things that are uniquely phenomenon from their own communities, I think is really important. And to stay excited about a subject matter that might be somewhat boring, or difficult to work through because of the nature of the content and or the mode of instruction. I think it's really important for students to try to grasp onto something that's familiar to them. So for Indigenous students, I would encourage them to, as they're sitting through their statistics class, to think about how could this particular skills assist in understanding things from their own community. But I think that's just great advice for any student, not just Indigenous students. Make it a very grounded skill that they could employ within their own communities.
What would you suggest to our viewers looking for ways to incorporate their cultural backgrounds into their future careers?
I think just what I mentioned earlier. Anything you teach or anything that you are learning in any of the courses you take, you should be trying to map that back to your own home or your own community in a certain way. And maybe not so much directly into your community or your home, or an issue or an emerging problem that particular skill might help to solve. I think if you attach onto that, I think that seems to be a worthy way to go.
We also lastly heard that you have a podcast.
Yeah.
Would you like to let us know a little bit more about that and when the next episode might be coming out?
Sure, yeah. So I and a colleague produce a podcast called Travel Research Specialist, where we talk about many things related to Indigenous matters, mostly philosophical, but centered probably primarily among the understandings of the tribal groups in the sort of the Rocky Mountain area. But a lot of the constructs we talk about are fairly common among many tribal groups. So understanding the constructs of reciprocity, relationality, the constructs of time and how they differ across communities. It's kind of what we sort of tackle, try to get an authentic view of those rather than a romantic understanding of those things.
All right, that's the end of our 24 questions. Thank you so much for your insightful answers.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for grilling me. That's fun. Yeah.